My sister invited everyone except me to her events for years. She was wailing when I did not invite her to my wedding. My sister Haley and I were close growing up until she went to college and decided she was too sophisticated for family. She studied marketing and came back acting like we were all beneath her, especially me since I went straight to work at the bank instead of university. But I still tried to maintain our relationship, calling her every week, remembering her birthday, sending gifts when she got promoted at her fancy advertising job. For a while, she'd at least respond to texts, even if she acted like talking to me was a chore. Everything changed when Haley started dating James, some director at her company who came from money. Suddenly, she was hosting dinner parties, wine tastings, and weekend trips to vineyards. I'd find out about these events from our cousin Brittany's Instagram stories. There'd be Brittany raising a glass at Haley's apartment with 20 other people. There'd be our other cousins at Haley's birthday party I didn't know was happening. There'd be childhood friends at her housewarming for the new condo she never told me she bought. When I asked Haley why I wasn't invited to her birthday, she said it was just a small work thing. Brittany's photos showed 30 people, including family members I saw at Christmas. When I confronted her about the housewarming, she said she didn't think I'd be interested in her friend group. Those friends included people we went to high school with. The worst was when our parents' 30th anniversary came around. Haley planned this huge surprise party at a restaurant downtown. She coordinated with our aunts, uncles, cousins, even my own boyfriend Rick to keep it secret from our parents. Everyone was invited except me. I only found out because Rick slipped and mentioned getting his suit dry cleaned for it. When I called Haley crying, asking why she'd exclude me from our own parents' anniversary, she said she needed people who could contribute financially, and she knew I was saving for a car. The party was just dinner, not some expensive event. She'd told everyone I was working that night, but it kept happening. Her engagement party? I found out from Facebook. Her bridal shower? Our mom accidentally mentioned it. Her bachelorette weekend? Brittany posted pictures from Vegas with matching shirts that said Team Haley. Each time, Haley had an excuse. The engagement party was mostly James's friends. The bridal shower was thrown by his mom, so she didn't control the guest list. The bachelorette trip was expensive, and she didn't want me to feel pressured. But she'd invited our teenage cousin Mia, who worked part-time at a coffee shop. When Haley's wedding came, I was invited as a regular guest, not a bridesmaid. She had 6 bridesmaids, including Brittany and girls she'd known for 2 years. At the wedding, people kept asking why I wasn't in the wedding party. Haley told them I wasn't comfortable with attention, which was news to me. Our grandmother pulled me aside and said it was shameful how Haley treated me. That's when I decided I was done trying. I stopped texting Haley, stopped calling, stopped pretending we had a relationship. She didn't notice for 3 months. Then last year, my life changed completely. Rick proposed with his grandmother's ring at the spot where we first met. My promotion at the bank came through, making me branch manager at 28. We found our dream house with the inheritance my great-aunt left specifically to me, not Haley, because she remembered who visited her when she was sick. And I started planning my wedding. The thing about working at a bank is you know everyone in town. The florist owed me for approving her business loan. The caterer was my client who I'd helped through bankruptcy. The venue owner's daughter was my best friend. I had connections Haley couldn't buy with her marketing salary. I planned a wedding that would make hers look like a backyard barbecue. 200 guests, live band, 5-course dinner, ceremony in the botanical garden she'd tried to book but couldn't afford. I invited everyone except Haley and James. Our parents, grandparents, all the aunts and uncles, every single cousin, including Brittany and Mia, Haley's former roommate, Haley's college friends who I'd stayed in touch with, even some of Haley's coworkers who I knew through Rick's company. Everyone got beautiful invitations with gold embossing. Haley got nothing. The family group chat exploded with excitement about my wedding. People were posting about dress shopping, planning their trips, booking hotels. Haley finally texted asking about her invitation, maybe getting lost in the mail. I didn't respond. She called our mom crying, and mom told her to talk to me directly. Haley showed up at my apartment demanding to know what was happening. I opened the door wearing my wedding dress from Final Fitting. She saw the invitation on my table, the one I was addressing to our mail carrier because I'd invited everyone who'd been kind to me. She asked where hers was. I looked at Haley standing in my doorway and felt something cold settle in my chest. There was no lost invitation. I never sent her one. She stared at me like she was waiting for me to laugh and say it was a joke, but I just stood there in my wedding dress, letting the silence stretch between us. Her face started to change, going from confused to scared to something that looked like she might cry. She asked why again, her voice cracking on the word. I started listing things out loud, keeping my voice calm and flat. Your birthday party 3 years ago with 30 people, including Brittany and our cousins. Your housewarming for the condo you never told me you bought. Mom and Dad's anniversary party that you planned and invited everyone except me. Your engagement party that I found out about on Facebook. Your bridal shower that Mom accidentally mentioned. Your bachelorette weekend in Vegas with matching shirts. I kept going, naming every single time she'd erased me from her life while she stood there looking smaller with each example. The wedding dress felt like armor, making me stand straighter as I watched her face crumble. Haley started talking fast, saying those situations were different and she had reasons. I cut her off before she could finish. I told her I was done listening to excuses, that I'd heard enough excuses to last a lifetime. She started crying for real then, tears running down her face as she said I was being cruel. She said family should forgive each other, that this wasn't who I was. I reminded her that she never thought family mattered when she was excluding me from her life year after year. She kept talking, trying to explain, but I stepped back and started closing the door. She put her hand out like she might try to stop me, but I shut it anyway while she was still saying my name. I locked the deadbolt and stood there with my hands shaking from adrenaline, listening to her footsteps finally walk away down the hallway. My phone started going crazy within an hour. Text after text lit up the screen, calls coming in back to back. I saw Mom's name, Dad's name, cousins I hadn't talked to in months. Mom left a voicemail and I could hear her crying through the phone, begging me to reconsider, saying this would destroy the family. Dad sent a long text about how this would tear everyone apart, and asking me to please think about what I was doing. Brittany messaged asking what happened. Mia sent question marks. Other cousins were messaging, asking if it was true that Haley wasn't invited. I watched the notifications pile up and then turned my phone completely off. I sat down on my couch still wearing the wedding dress, the tulle spreading out around me. I felt powerful and sick at the same time, like I'd won something but the prize tasted wrong in my mouth. Blake came home from work and found me exactly like that, sitting on the couch in my wedding dress with my phone face down on the coffee table. He stopped in the doorway and I could tell from his face that he already knew. Haley must have called him crying. He sat down carefully next to me, not touching the dress, and asked if I was okay. I told him I was fine, that I did what I needed to do. He nodded slowly, but he looked worried in a way that made my stomach twist up. He asked if I wanted to talk about it, and I said there wasn't anything to talk about. Haley excluded me for years, and now she knew how it felt. Blake didn't argue, but the worry didn't leave his face either. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the look on Haley's face when she realized I really wasn't going to invite her. I kept hearing Mom's voicemail, the way her voice broke when she was begging me to reconsider. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Haley standing in my doorway getting smaller and smaller as I listed out all her betrayals. Blake held me in the dark and didn't say anything, but I could feel his concern like a physical thing between us. I told myself over and over that I did the right thing, that she deserved this after everything she'd done to me. But the satisfaction I felt earlier when I closed the door in her face had turned into something uncomfortable sitting heavy in my chest. Dad showed up at my apartment the next morning before I even left for work. I opened the door and he looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept at all. He said Mom was up all night crying, that Haley was completely devastated, and that he needed to understand why I was doing this. I let him in and made coffee while he sat at my kitchen table looking sad and tired. I walked him through everything. Every single exclusion and excuse and time I felt invisible to my own sister. I told him about finding out about events from Instagram, about being lied to about guest lists, about being left out of our own parents' anniversary party. He listened to all of it and his face got sadder with each thing I said. Dad admitted he didn't realize how bad it had been. He said Haley always had explanations that seemed reasonable at the time, that she made it sound like small misunderstandings instead of a pattern. He rubbed his face with both hands and said he wasn't asking me to invite her, but he wanted to know if there was any way to fix this before the wedding destroyed our family completely. I told him I spent years trying to fix it while Haley pretended I didn't exist. I said I tried calling, texting, showing up, caring, and none of it mattered to her. Now it was too late to fix anything. At work, I couldn't focus on anything. Vikram stopped by my desk and noticed I was staring at the same loan application I'd been looking at for 20 minutes. He asked if everything was okay with the wedding planning. I ended up telling him the whole situation, about Haley excluding me for years, and me excluding her from my wedding. He listened without interrupting, and then said something that stuck with me. He said revenge might feel good in the moment, but it rarely makes people happy in the long run. I tried to focus on customer meetings and processing applications after that, but his words kept playing in my head, making me uncomfortable. Mom called me during my lunch break. This time she wasn't crying. She was angry. Her voice was sharp when she said I was being just as cruel as Haley ever was. She said 2 wrongs don't make a right, and that I was ruining what should be a happy time for everyone. She said the whole family was being torn apart, and I was choosing revenge over love. I hung up on her in the middle of a sentence, something I'd never done before in my entire life. I sat in my car in the bank parking lot and immediately felt guilty. But I also felt angry that she was making me the bad guy when Haley did this to me for years. Ariel came over that evening with wine and Chinese takeout. She was ready to celebrate, saying she was proud of me for standing up to Haley after all these years. But when she saw my face, she switched modes immediately. She put the wine down and sat next to me on the couch and asked what was really going on in my head. I admitted that winning didn't feel the way I thought it would. I told her I felt sick instead of satisfied, that everyone was mad at me and Blake was worried, and I didn't know if I'd made a huge mistake. She held my hand and didn't try to tell me what to do, just listened while I talked through all the confusion and guilt sitting heavy in my chest. The next evening, Blake's phone rang while we were eating dinner, and I watched his face change as he answered. His parents were calling, and from the way he kept glancing at me with this apologetic look, I knew exactly what the conversation was about. He walked into the bedroom for privacy, but I could hear his muffled voice through the door, the careful tone he uses when he's trying to be diplomatic. When he came back 20 minutes later, he sat down heavily and rubbed his face with both hands. His mom had heard about everything from her sister who knew someone in our family, and she wanted to know what was happening. She'd suggested maybe Blake told me he defended my decision, explained the years of exclusion, made them understand why I felt this way. But even as he said the words, I could see the stress written all over him in a way I'd never seen before. His shoulders were tight, his jaw was clenched, and he kept looking at me like he was worried I might break. His parents weren't demanding anything, he said carefully, but they were concerned about him getting caught in the middle of something that could define our whole marriage. I told him I appreciated him defending me, but my voice came out flat and tired instead of grateful. The next morning at the bank, I was in my office reviewing a business expansion loan when the florist walked in for her scheduled appointment. We'd always had a good working relationship since I'd approved her initial business loan 3 years ago, and she'd been excited about doing my wedding flowers. But today she sat down across from my desk and wouldn't quite meet my eyes, fidgeting with her purse strap. She started talking about the floral arrangements, the color scheme, the delivery schedule, all the normal details we needed to finalize. Then she paused and said she'd heard there was some family trouble, her voice going soft and careful like she was stepping around broken glass. I felt my face get hot because I realized that in a town this small, everyone would know about the conflict. The florist, the caterer, the venue staff, my coworkers, the clients who came through the bank every day. My professional reputation that I'd worked so hard to build was getting tangled up with personal drama, and I couldn't separate the two. She quickly added that it wasn't her business and she wasn't judging, but the way she said it made me feel judged anyway. After she left, I sat at my desk feeling exposed and embarrassed in a way I hadn't anticipated. Vikram knocked on my door to ask about a client file, took one look at my face and asked if I was okay. I lied and said I was fine, but I wasn't fine at all. That afternoon, my phone rang with a call instead of a text from Brittany, which was unusual because we always texted. I almost didn't answer because I knew what was coming, but I picked up on the fourth ring. Her voice was gentle, but tired when she said she understood why I was hurt, that she knew Haley had messed up badly over the years. But then she told me Haley had been calling her sobbing every single night, that the whole family was forced to choose sides, that cousins were fighting with each other about who was right. She asked me directly if this was really what I wanted, everyone torn apart and miserable over my wedding that was supposed to be a celebration. I opened my mouth to give her all my reasons, to list every exclusion and every excuse, but nothing came out. I didn't have a good answer because I hadn't thought about it that way. I'd been so focused on making Haley feel what I felt that I hadn't considered what it would do to everyone else. Brittany wasn't trying to guilt me, she said. She just wanted me to think about whether the revenge was worth the cost. After we hung up, I sat in my car in the bank parking lot for 15 minutes, staring at nothing and feeling that uncomfortable twist in my stomach get worse. Later that week, I drove past the botanical garden venue to check on the setup progress because the wedding was getting close, and I needed to make sure everything was perfect. But when I pulled into the parking lot, I saw Haley's car sitting there under a tree. My heart started racing immediately, pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. She was probably inside right now talking to the venue coordinator, maybe trying to convince them to talk to me, maybe crying about how unfair this all was. I couldn't face her again, couldn't handle another confrontation, or see that devastated look on her face. I turned my car around before anyone could see me and drove away, checking my rearview mirror like I was chased. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel and I realized I was scared. Not of Haley exactly, but of having to defend my decision one more time, of seeing the judgment in someone else's eyes, of feeling this guilt that wouldn't go away no matter how much I told myself I was right. That night, Blake and I were getting ready for bed when he finally said what he'd been holding back for days. He sat on the edge of our bed and looked at me with this serious expression, and I knew something big was coming. He told me he loved me and supported me, that he would stand by whatever decision I made. But then he said he was worried I was letting anger make choices that I'd regret for the rest of my life. He asked if I'd really thought about what it would be like at the wedding with this giant Haley-shaped absence, with everyone thinking about her instead of celebrating us. He said our wedding day would be marked by this conflict forever, if I didn't find some way to resolve it before then. His words hit me hard because he wasn't wrong, but I also felt defensive and cornered. I'd been expecting him to support me without question, to be on my side unconditionally, and this felt like a betrayal even though I knew it wasn't. I snapped at him that he didn't understand what it was like to be erased by your own sister for years, to be systematically excluded and lied to and made to feel worthless. My voice came out sharper than I meant it to, almost mean. Blake was quiet for a long moment, and when he responded, his voice was soft and careful. He said he did understand hurt, that everyone understands hurt, but he also understood that our wedding day would carry this conflict with us forever if I didn't find a way to resolve it. He wasn't telling me what to do, he said, but he was asking me to really think about what I wanted my wedding to represent. We went to bed angry at each other for the first time in our entire relationship, lying on opposite sides of the mattress with space between us that felt like miles. I couldn't sleep, staring at the ceiling and feeling angry at Blake for not understanding, angry at Haley for creating this mess, angry at myself for not knowing what the right answer was anymore. The next morning, I apologized to Blake for snapping at him, and he apologized for pushing me when I was already stressed. We sat at the kitchen table with our coffee and agreed that whatever I decided, he would support completely. But the conversation had planted seeds of doubt that I couldn't ignore anymore, growing in my mind like weeds. I started wondering if I was making the biggest day of our lives about Haley instead of about us, if I was giving her more power by excluding her than she ever had when she was excluded me. Blake held my hand across the table and said he just wanted me to be happy and at peace with my choices, whatever they were. But I wasn't at peace, and we both knew it. Later that day, the caterer called with a problem. One of Haley's co-workers who I'd invited had declined the invitation, saying she didn't want to be involved in family drama. The caterer needed to adjust the final head count and wanted to confirm that other guests weren't going to drop out at the last minute. I felt my stomach drop as I realized that other people might start declining too, that my perfect 200-person wedding could start shrinking as guests chose to avoid the awkwardness. The practical consequences were hitting harder than the emotional ones because I could see my beautiful wedding falling apart piece by piece. I told the caterer I'd get back to her about the final numbers, but I had no idea what those numbers would be. After I hung up, I sat at my desk and put my head in my hands, feeling like everything was spiraling out of my control. The next day, Ariel took me to lunch at our favorite sandwich place, and I was grateful for the distraction. But after we ordered, she got this serious look on her face and said she'd been thinking about the situation differently lately. When she first heard my plan to exclude Haley, she'd been all for it because Haley deserved payback after years of treating me badly. But now she was watching it hurt me and Blake and tear the family apart, and she was wondering if there was a better way to handle it. Her honesty stung because Ariel was supposed to be on my side unconditionally, supposed to support whatever I decided without question. I asked her if she thought I should just forgive Haley and pretend nothing happened, and she said that wasn't what she meant at all. She just thought maybe there was something between total exclusion and pretending everything was fine, some middle ground where I could protect myself without destroying everything. I picked at my sandwich without eating much, feeling betrayed even though I knew she was trying to help. That weekend, I drove to Grandmother Theodora's house hoping for validation, hoping she'd tell me I was right to stand my ground. She opened the door and hugged me like always, but when we sat down in her living room with tea, she looked at me with sad eyes that made my chest tight. She said she was too old for family feuds, that she'd seen too many of them destroy people over the years. Life was short and grudges were heavy, she told me, and she didn't want to spend what time she had left watching her granddaughters destroy each other. She'd been watching our family tear itself apart over this wedding, and it was breaking her heart. Her words hit differently than everyone else's because Grandmother Theodora had never been dramatic or manipulative, never took sides or played favorites. She just told the truth as she saw it, and right now the truth was that I was hurting myself as much as I was hurting Haley. I left her house feeling worse than when I arrived, carrying the weight of her disappointment along with everything else. The next evening, Blake suggested we see someone who helps couples talk through problems before the wedding. He was careful about how he said it, making it clear we weren't in trouble but that we needed help dealing with all this family stuff together. I didn't want to go because it felt like admitting defeat, like saying I couldn't handle my own choices. But I could see the worry lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 2 weeks ago, could feel the tension in his shoulders when he hugged me. I agreed because watching him carry my stress was worse than my pride. The counselor's office smelled like lavender and had too many throw pillows on the couch. She asked basic questions about the wedding, about our relationship, about what brought us in. Then she looked at me and asked what I actually wanted to achieve with excluding Haley. I opened my mouth to say I wanted her to understand how she made me feel, wanted her to hurt the way I hurt, wanted justice for years of being invisible. But sitting there with Blake holding my hand and this stranger waiting patiently, I realized I had no idea what I wanted anymore. The satisfaction had worn off weeks ago, and all that was left was this heavy exhaustion that followed me everywhere. 2 days later, I was scrolling through my phone during lunch when Haley's post popped up on my feed. It was a photo of us as kids, maybe 7 and 9, with our arms wrapped around each other and matching gap-toothed smiles. The caption talked about how family should always be there for each other no matter what, how blood is thicker than water, how sisters are supposed to be best friends forever. She didn't mention me by name, but every single person who saw it would know exactly what she meant. The comments filled up fast with people telling her they loved her, that real family sticks together, that some people don't understand loyalty. Brittany commented with 3 heart emojis. My anger flared up hot and immediate, making my hands shake as I read through the responses. But underneath the anger was something worse, this burning embarrassment that our private fight was now public entertainment. Everyone in town would see this post, would know that Haley's sister was the villain who abandoned family, and I couldn't defend myself without looking even worse. The wedding planner called that afternoon while I was trying to focus on a loan application. She apologized for bothering me, but the seating chart was becoming impossible because family members kept requesting not to sit near other family members based on whose side they were on in this whole situation. Aunt Carol didn't want to be near Uncle Jim because he thought I was being cruel. Cousin Brittany needed to be far from my best friend Ariel because they'd gotten into an argument about it online. The planner's voice was gentle when she suggested that maybe fixing the actual problem would be easier than trying to manage all these ripple effects. I hung up feeling like even strangers were looking at me and finding me wrong, like my choices were being judged by people who didn't know the full story, but had already decided I was the bad guy. Blake's sister called me the next day, which surprised me because we were friendly but not close. She asked if we could meet for coffee, and I agreed mostly out of curiosity. When we sat down, she told me about a huge fight she'd had with her own sister years back over something that seemed important at the time, but she couldn't even remember the details now. She said she was right in that fight, completely justified, and everyone told her she was right. But being right didn't make up for the 3 years of distance that followed, didn't fill the hole at family gatherings where her sister should have been. She wished she'd found a way to fix things sooner instead of holding on to being right until it didn't matter anymore. Her perspective hit different from advice from people who knew Haley, who had opinions about our specific history. She was just someone who'd lived through something similar and come out the other side with regrets. I ended up working late at the bank 3 nights in a row, telling myself it was because we were busy with end-of-month reports. Vikram stopped by my office on the 3rd night and leaned against the doorframe asking if I was avoiding going home. I tried to brush it off, but he just waited, and eventually I admitted that things with Blake were tense, that my parents weren't speaking to me, that I felt more alone now than I had in years. He sat down across from my desk and pointed out something I'd been trying not to see. I excluded Haley to punish her for making me feel excluded, but now I was more excluded than ever. I'd pushed away my sister, my parents, half my extended family, and was putting strain on my relationship with Blake. The punishment had circled back and hit me harder than it hit her. Mom showed up at the bank right before closing the next day. I couldn't avoid her in a professional setting, couldn't close the door in her face when I was still in my work clothes with customers around. She didn't yell or cry this time, just sat in the chair across from my desk and asked if I remembered when Haley and I were little and inseparable. She talked about how we used to make up elaborate games and refuse to play with anyone else, how we'd cry if we were separated even for a few hours. She said she didn't know exactly when things went wrong between us, couldn't point to a single moment where it all fell apart. But she knew this wasn't who I really was. This person holding on to anger so tight it was poisoning everything around me. She was scared of losing both her daughters to pride, watching us destroy our relationship over who could hurt who worse. That night I couldn't sleep, so I pulled out the old photo albums from the hall closet. Page after page showed Haley and me hugging in every single picture, wearing matching outfits our mom dressed us in, making silly faces at the camera together. There was the Halloween we were both cats, the Christmas we got matching bikes, the summer at the beach where we built sandcastles side by side. I tried to find the exact moment when she started pulling away, when I became someone she was embarrassed by instead of her best friend. But there was no single moment, just this gradual drift I couldn't pin down. 1 year we were inseparable, and then suddenly years had passed and we were strangers who shared DNA. Blake's phone rang at 2 a.m, jerking us both awake from restless sleep. I could hear panic in the voice on the other end, even though I couldn't make out words. Blake's face went white as he listened, and then he was pulling on clothes and telling me we needed to get to the hospital now. Grandmother Theodora had a heart attack, and the whole family was called in. We rushed out in our pajamas, not bothering to change, and I felt this cold terror settle in my stomach. The wedding drama that had consumed every thought for weeks suddenly felt incredibly small and stupid compared to the possibility of losing her. The hospital waiting room was too bright and smelled like cleaning products and fear. I saw Haley the second we walked in, standing near the windows looking as exhausted and scared as I felt. We locked eyes for just a moment before both looking away, neither of us knowing what to say after weeks of silence and anger. Mom was sobbing into Dad's shoulder while he tried to get information from the nurses. Cousins filled the plastic chairs, everyone looking shell-shocked and worried. Brittany was crying quietly, and even the cousins who'd taken sides in our fight looked too scared to care about that anymore. The doctor came through the double doors and everyone stood up at once. He said Grandmother Theodora was stable, but it had been serious, a real heart attack that could have killed her. Then he said something about how stress wasn't good for her heart, how she needed calm and peace to recover. He didn't say it directly, but everyone in that waiting room heard what he meant. The family conflict had been affecting her health. The fighting between her granddaughters had put stress on her heart. I felt sick, actually thought I might throw up right there on the hospital floor. All this anger, all this revenge, all this proving a point, and I'd hurt the one person in our family who never took sides, who only ever loved both of us completely. The waiting room chairs were hard plastic that made my back ache, and by 4 a.m, every seat was taken except the one next to Haley. I stood against the wall for 20 minutes before my legs started shaking from exhaustion and fear, and finally I just sat down beside her because there was nowhere else to go. We didn't look at each other or say anything, just stared at the same ugly beige wall across from us while tears kept sliding down both our faces. My hands were folded in my lap, and I was trying to hold myself together when I felt her fingers brush against mine, hesitant and tentative, like she wasn't sure if I'd pull away. Then her hand closed around mine and squeezed hard, and I squeezed back without thinking about it. It was the first time we'd touched in years, not since that awkward hug at her wedding where she'd barely put her arms around me. Her palm was sweaty and cold and shaking just like mine, and something cracked open in my chest that I'd been keeping locked down tight. We sat there holding hands while the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and nurses walked past with clipboards, and somewhere down the hall, a machine kept beeping in a steady rhythm that made me want to scream. A doctor in blue scrubs finally came through the double doors and said we could see Grandmother Theodora for 5 minutes. Just immediate family, 2 at a time. Mom and Dad went first while the rest of us waited, and when they came back out, Mom's face was blotchy and swollen from crying. Then the doctor looked at Haley and me and gestured for us to come together. We walked down that hallway side by side without talking, past rooms with curtains pulled across and the smell of disinfectant burning my nose. Grandmother Theodora looked so tiny in the hospital bed, smaller than I'd ever seen her, with wires attached to her chest and an oxygen tube under her nose. Her skin was gray and papery, and her eyes were closed, and for a second I thought we were too late, that she was already gone. But then her eyes opened when we got close, and she looked at both of us with this expression that made me want to fall apart completely. She lifted one hand, the one without the IV, and reached for us. Haley took one side and I took the other, and Grandmother Theodora's fingers felt like bird bones wrapped in tissue paper. Her voice came out raspy and weak when she spoke, telling us she didn't want to leave this world with her granddaughters hating each other. She said life was too short and family was too important, and she needed us to promise we'd fix this, whatever it took. Haley started sobbing out loud, these ugly gasping sounds, and I was crying too, but trying to stay quiet because I didn't want to upset Grandmother Theodora more. We both nodded and promised, even though neither of us had any idea how to actually do that, how to undo years of hurt and anger and exclusion. Grandmother Theodora closed her eyes again, and the nurse came in and said our time was up, that she needed to rest. Walking back down that hallway felt like moving through water, everything slow and heavy and wrong. Blake drove us home as the sun was starting to come up, turning the sky pink and orange in a way that felt obscene given what had just happened. I sat in the passenger seat staring out the window at empty streets and closed shops, watching the town wake up like it was any normal day. Blake kept one hand on the wheel and held mine with the other, not saying anything because what was there to say? When we pulled into our driveway, I just sat there for a minute looking at our house, this place we'd picked out together and filled with wedding planning stress and stupid arguments about Haley. Blake came around and opened my door and helped me out like I was the one who'd had a heart attack, and we walked inside together. The apartment still had my wedding binder on the coffee table, and invitation samples scattered across the kitchen counter, all these reminders of the drama that had seemed so important 12 hours ago. That's when I completely lost it, just collapsed onto the couch and sobbed until I couldn't breathe. Blake sat next to me and pulled me against his chest and let me cry about Grandmother Theodora and Haley and the massive mess I'd created by trying to hurt my sister the way she'd hurt me. I kept saying I was sorry over and over, even though Blake wasn't the one I needed to apologize to. And he just held me and stroked my hair and told me it was going to be okay, even though neither of us knew if that was true. I finally fell asleep around 7 and woke up 3 hours later to my phone buzzing with a text from Brittany asking if I wanted to meet for coffee. My first instinct was to say no because I felt hollowed out and exhausted, but something made me say yes instead. Blake was asleep on the chair across from the couch, his neck bent at an angle that was going to hurt later, and I wrote him a note before leaving. The coffee shop was mostly empty on a weekday morning, just a few people with laptops and a mom with a stroller. Brittany was already there at a corner table, fidgeting with her cup and looking nervous in a way I'd never seen her before. She stood up when I walked over and hugged me hard, and I could feel her shaking a little. She asked how Grandmother Theodora was doing, and I told her stable but scary, and then there was this long pause where neither of us knew what to say. Finally, Brittany took a deep breath and said she needed to tell me something she should have told me years ago, something Haley made everyone promise to keep secret. She said Haley had struggled with really bad anxiety after college, the kind that made her throw up before work and cry in bathroom stalls and feel like she was failing at everything. Brittany explained that all those times Haley excluded me, it wasn't because she thought she was better than me. It was because she felt like she wasn't good enough, especially compared to me who seemed to have everything together while Haley was barely holding on. I just stared at Brittany because this made no sense with the version of Haley I knew, the confident marketing professional who posted about fancy dinners and work promotions. Brittany pulled out her phone and started scrolling through old text messages, showing me conversations from years back. There was Haley saying she couldn't invite me to her birthday because she felt like such a failure compared to me. There was Haley saying she avoided me because I had my life figured out while she was falling apart. There was Haley talking about how I seemed so happy and stable and she felt like a mess in comparison. I read message after message that completely contradicted the story I'd been telling myself for years. The narrative where Haley excluded me because she thought I wasn't sophisticated enough, because she was embarrassed by me, because she'd decided I wasn't worth her time. All of it was cracking apart as I read her actual words about feeling inadequate and anxious, and like she couldn't face me. I asked Brittany why nobody ever told me this, my voice coming out sharper than I meant it to. She looked down at her coffee and admitted that Haley made everyone promise not to say anything because she was so embarrassed about the anxiety and the therapy and feeling like she couldn't handle adult life. Brittany said she'd kept that promise for years, but Grandmother Theodora's heart attack made her realize that family secrets were destroying us, that maybe if I'd known the truth years ago, things would have been different. I left the coffee shop feeling like the ground had shifted under my feet, like I'd been living in one reality and suddenly got dropped into a completely different one where nothing was what I thought it was. I sat in my car in the parking lot for over an hour, just staring at the steering wheel and trying to process everything Brittany had told me. My phone had 3 missed calls from Blake and a text asking where I was, but I couldn't make myself respond yet. Then Blake's car pulled into the parking lot and he parked next to me, and I watched him get out and come around to my window. I unlocked the door and he slid into the passenger seat, not saying anything at first, just waiting for me to be ready to talk. I told him what Brittany had revealed about Haley's anxiety and feeling inadequate, and he listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a minute before asking if this changed how I felt about everything. I admitted I didn't know, that understanding why Haley excluded me didn't magically erase years of pain and rejection, but it made the whole thing more complicated than just her being cruel or thinking she was better than me. My phone rang, and it was the counselor Blake and I had seen a few weeks ago, the one who'd helped us talk through wedding stress. She said she'd heard about Grandmother Theodora from my mom and wanted to check in, see how I was doing. We talked for a few minutes about the hospital and the family tension, and then she asked me a question that hit harder than anything else that day. She wanted to know what I actually wanted from this situation. Did I want Haley to hurt the way she'd hurt me, or did I want a relationship with my sister? The question seemed obvious when she said it out loud, but I realized I'd been so focused on revenge and payback that I never actually stopped to think about what healing would look like. I'd spent months planning this perfect way to exclude Haley, to make her feel invisible and unwanted, but I'd never asked myself what I wanted on the other side of that. The counselor said to think about it and call her back if I needed to talk more, and then she hung up and left me sitting there with Blake in a coffee shop parking lot, trying to figure out who I wanted to be. That afternoon, I went back to the hospital by myself. Grandmother Theodora was awake this time, sitting up a little with better color in her face. She smiled when she saw me and patted the bed next to her, and I sat down carefully, trying not to jostle any of the wires and tubes. She started telling me about her own sister, Aunt Margaret, who died 20 years ago, and how they'd had this huge fight when Grandmother Theodora was in her 30s. She couldn't even remember what the fight was about anymore, something about borrowed money or a boyfriend or maybe both, but they'd stopped speaking for almost a decade. By the time Grandmother Theodora finally swallowed her pride and reached out, Aunt Margaret had cancer and only lived 6 more months. Grandmother Theodora said that regret had haunted her for 40 years, wishing she'd fixed things sooner, wishing she hadn't wasted all that time being angry over something that didn't matter anymore. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and said she didn't want that for Haley and me, didn't want us to wake up one day and realize we'd thrown away our relationship over hurt feelings and pride. I drove home thinking about Aunt Margaret and all those wasted years, and when I walked in the door, my phone was ringing. It was the florist, the one who owed me for approving her business loan, and she sounded panicked. One of her main suppliers had fallen through, and she needed to completely redesign all the wedding arrangements with only 3 days to go. I felt stress crash over me on top of everything else, and I was about to lose it when she said something that stopped me cold. She mentioned that Haley had actually helped her find a backup supplier, had given her a contact at some wholesale place, and even vouched for the florist's business. The florist had no idea about our family drama, and was just grateful for the help. But hearing that Haley had done something kind for my wedding when she wasn't even invited made me have to sit down. I realized my sister wasn't some villain in a story, wasn't this cruel person who enjoyed hurting me. She was just complicated and flawed and dealing with her own problems, and maybe both of us had been hurting each other without meaning to for a really long time. Blake came home around 6 that evening and found me sitting on the couch staring at my phone without actually looking at it. He sat down next to me and took my hand. He said we needed to make a final decision about Haley because the wedding was in 3 days, and the seating chart was still a mess, and the venue needed final numbers. He wasn't pushing either way, just being practical, but he said I needed to be at peace with whatever I chose. I realized right then that I wasn't at peace with anything. The satisfaction from excluding Haley had turned into this heavy weight sitting on my chest. I felt guilty and confused and so tired of thinking about it. Blake kissed my forehead and went to start dinner while I sat there trying to figure out what I actually wanted. After we ate, I went into the bedroom and called Ariel. She answered on the second ring and I could hear her TV in the background. I asked her to tell me honestly what she thought I should do about Haley. The line went quiet for so long I thought the call dropped. Then she said she'd support me no matter what, but she thought I'd regret keeping Haley away more than I'd regret letting her come. She reminded me that the wedding was supposed to be about starting fresh with Blake, and I got to choose if that meant holding on to old hurt or trying something new. Her words made my eyes burn with tears because she was right, and I knew it. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while Blake slept next to me. Around 2 in the morning, I finally whispered that I didn't want Haley at my wedding just to punish her anymore. Blake's eyes opened and he rolled over to face me. I told him I was scared of looking weak, like I was saying what she did was okay. He pulled me close and said that changing my mind wasn't weakness, it was growth. He said the strongest thing I could do was choose what felt right for me, instead of what proved a point to everyone else. I cried into his shoulder until I fell asleep. The next morning, I woke up early and sat at the kitchen table with my phone and a cup of coffee. I opened a text to Haley and typed out this long message explaining everything, then deleted it. I tried again with something shorter and angrier, then deleted that too. I must have written 20 different versions before I finally sent something simple. Can we talk before the wedding? I stared at my phone for maybe 10 seconds before 3 dots appeared. Her response came through immediately. Yes, please. Anytime. My hands were shaking as I typed back suggesting coffee that afternoon. I met Haley at this neutral coffee shop halfway between our apartments. She was already sitting at a corner table when I arrived, looking nervous and tired. I ordered my drink and sat down across from her, and neither of us knew how to start. She finally took a deep breath and said she was sorry. Not the fake sorry with excuses attached, but real sorry where she owned everything she did. She said her anxiety and insecurity didn't justify excluding me from her life. Tears started running down her face, and she said she'd been in therapy since her engagement party, working through why she pushed me away. She said she realized how much damage she caused and how badly she hurt me. I told Haley that her apology helped, but it didn't erase years of feeling invisible. It didn't fix all the times I found out about her life through Instagram or accidental comments from Mom. She nodded and wiped her eyes and said she didn't expect me to forgive her right away. She said she knew she destroyed my trust, and it would take time to rebuild it if I even wanted to try. We sat there for 3 hours talking more honestly than we had since we were teenagers. She told me about her panic attacks and feeling like a failure compared to me. I told her about crying in my car after seeing photos of events I wasn't invited to. It was painful and awkward, but also kind of healing. When we finished our coffee, I told Haley I needed 24 hours to think about the wedding. I said I wasn't ready to decide right then because I needed to figure out what I actually wanted, not what everyone else wanted. She said she understood completely and just appreciated that I was willing to talk to her at all. Blake picked me up from the coffee shop and I felt lighter than I had in weeks. He asked how it went and I said it was hard but good, and he squeezed my hand without pushing for more details. That night, Blake gave me space by watching TV in the living room while I sat alone in our bedroom. I thought about what kind of person I wanted to be and what kind of marriage I wanted to start. I kept coming back to grandmother Theodora talking about her sister and 40 years of regret. I realized that beginning my life with Blake by holding on to hatred and revenge wasn't the foundation I wanted. I didn't want to look at my wedding photos in 20 years and remember this conflict instead of the joy. I decided I didn't want to carry that weight. The morning before the wedding, I woke up and knew what I had to do. I called Haley before I could change my mind. When she answered, I told her she could come to the wedding. I made it clear that this didn't mean everything was fixed between us, that we had a lot of work to do, but I didn't want my wedding day defined by her absence. She started crying and thanking me over and over. I felt this weird mix of relief and lingering resentment, and I told Blake later that maybe feeling both things at once was normal. I called Mom next and she burst into happy tears. She said she was proud of me for being the bigger person. Dad called right after, probably because Mom told him immediately, and he said the same thing about me doing the right thing. I told them both that I wasn't being the bigger person, and this wasn't about right or wrong. I was just choosing what I could live with, and there was a difference between that and being noble. Ariel showed up the next afternoon with her arms full of ribbon samples and her usual energy. She dropped everything on my kitchen table and pulled me into a hug that lasted longer than normal. She said she knew I'd figure out what was right for me, that she never doubted it even when things got messy. We spent the rest of the day sorting through final wedding details, folding programs, checking the seating chart one more time, arranging favors into neat rows. It felt good to focus on tablecloths and centerpieces instead of family drama. My hands stayed busy tying ribbons while my mind finally got some quiet. Blake came home from work early and kept checking on me every 20 minutes, asking if I needed anything, if I was okay with everything, if I had any doubts. I told him each time that I was fine, that I'd made my choice, and I meant it. He looked relieved but still worried, like he was waiting for me to change my mind or break down. Ariel stayed for dinner and we talked about normal things like her new apartment and Blake's upcoming work project. Nobody mentioned Haley's name once, and the absence of that conversation felt like freedom. I woke up on my wedding day with my stomach doing flips, but not because of Haley. I was nervous about walking down the aisle in front of 200 people. I was nervous about saying my vows without crying or forgetting the words. I was nervous about the first dance and whether the food would be good and if the weather would hold. Normal wedding nerves that every bride probably feels. When Ariel helped me into my dress at the hotel, it felt completely different from when I wore it to confront Haley at my apartment. That day it had felt like battle armor, something to make me look powerful and untouchable. Today it just felt like a wedding dress, beautiful and special and meant for celebration. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw a bride instead of someone proving a point. My hands shook while Ariel buttoned up the back, but it was good shaking, excited shaking. Mom came in and started crying immediately, saying I looked perfect. Dad poked his head in and his eyes got wet too. Everything felt right in a way it hadn't for weeks. The botanical garden looked exactly how I'd imagined it, maybe even better. White chairs lined up in perfect rows, flowers everywhere in colors that matched my vision exactly. Guests were arriving in their nice clothes, smiling and hugging each other, taking photos by the fountain. Nobody looked tense or awkward like I'd feared they might. The sun was shining but not too hot, and a light breeze kept everything comfortable. I watched from a window in the venue's prep room as people found their seats. Then I saw Haley arrive with James. She was wearing a simple blue dress, nothing flashy or attention-seeking. She stayed near the back, didn't stop to talk to many people, kept her head down in a way that showed she was trying not to make this about her. Mom rushed over and hugged them both, crying those happy tears that moms cry. I watched Mom hold both of us in her mind at the same time, finally able to celebrate without that gap where one daughter should be. Something in my chest loosened watching that hug, seeing my family actually together. I was standing in the hallway waiting for my cue to walk when Haley appeared beside me. She asked quietly if she could talk to me for just 1 minute. Her eyes were already red and her hands were shaking. She said she knew she didn't deserve to be here, that she was grateful I'd given her this chance. She said she was going to spend however long it took proving she could be the sister I deserved all along. Her voice cracked on the last words and I could see she meant every single one. I didn't have words that felt big enough for the moment, so I just pulled her into a quick hug. She squeezed back hard, and for a second we were just sisters again, not people with years of hurt between us. Then Ariel was there pulling me away, saying it was time to line up. Haley stepped back and wiped her eyes and nodded at me. I turned toward the doors and heard the music starting. Walking down the aisle toward Blake, I could see everyone. My whole family sitting together in their sections, cousins and aunts and uncles all in one place, grandmother looking healthy and happy in the front row, friends from work and from high school. Blake's family on the other side looking just as happy. Instead of feeling angry about all the drama it took to get here, I just felt grateful that we'd made it. Blake was standing at the altar and his eyes were shining with tears before I was even halfway down. When I reached him, he whispered that I looked beautiful. Then he added that he was proud of me and his voice was thick with emotion. The officiant started talking and I barely heard the words because I was too focused on Blake's hands holding mine. The ceremony happened around us and I was completely present for all of it, not thinking about Haley or the past or anything except marrying the person I loved. When we kissed, everyone cheered and the sound washed over me like a wave of pure joy. During the reception, I kept noticing Haley staying at her table near the back. She didn't try to insert herself into the receiving line or the photos or any of the special moments. She sat quietly with James, clapping when everyone else clapped, smiling when she caught my eye but not pushing for more. When Dad and I danced, I saw her crying from across the room. Later, she came up to Blake and me during a quiet moment and congratulated us. She kept it short and sincere, just said we looked happy together and she wished us the best. Then she stepped back before the moment could get awkward. The whole day wasn't marked by her presence the way I'd feared it might be. She was just another guest, someone who belonged there but wasn't trying to take over. I realized somewhere between the toasts and the cake cutting that inviting her had actually freed me. I wasn't spending my wedding day thinking about the person who wasn't there. I was just enjoying the people who were. Grandmother found Haley and me during a lull in the dancing and pulled us both to a quiet corner. She held both our hands in her small wrinkled ones and said this was exactly what she'd prayed for. She said seeing us together and starting to heal was the best wedding gift she could receive. Her voice was strong despite just getting out of the hospital, and her grip on our hands was firm. She made us promise to keep working on our relationship, to not let this moment be the end of our progress. We both promised, and this time I could feel that we meant it. Haley squeezed my hand, and I squeezed back, and Grandmother smiled bigger than I'd seen in years. She kissed both our cheeks and told us she loved us, then shuffled back to her table looking satisfied. Later in the reception, Brittany found me by the bar and pulled me aside. She said several cousins had been talking about how mature and graceful I was to include Haley despite everything she'd done. Brittany said people were impressed, that they saw real strength in forgiveness instead of weakness. She said I'd earned more respect from the family than I would have gotten by excluding Haley. The validation felt good even though it hadn't been why I made the choice. I'd invited Haley because I needed to for myself, not for anyone else's opinion. But hearing that people understood and respected the decision made something settle inside me. I wasn't the bitter sister holding a grudge. I was someone who'd chosen healing, and that meant something to people. Blake grabbed my hand during a slow song and pulled me outside to the garden path where we could be alone for a minute. The music was muffled out there, and the fairy lights made everything glow soft. He turned to face me and said he'd never been more sure about marrying me than when he watched me choose healing over revenge. He said the way I'd handled this whole situation with Haley showed him exactly who I was as a person. He said he felt honored to build a life with someone that strong and brave. His words hit me right in the chest and I started crying, but they were happy tears that had nothing to do with Haley or the past. They were tears about Blake and our future and the life we were starting together. He wiped my face and kissed me, and we stood there swaying to the distant music, just the two of us in our own bubble. At the end of the night, Blake and I were saying goodbye to the last guests when Haley approached one more time. She had a card in her hand, and she held it out to me carefully. She said she didn't expect me to read it now, but she wanted me to have it before we left for our honeymoon. I took it and tucked it into my purse, too tired and happy to think about it much. Later, in our hotel room with champagne and room service, I remembered the card. I opened it while Blake was in the shower. Inside was a long letter in Haley's handwriting, pages of it. She took full responsibility for every single thing she'd done to hurt me. She didn't make excuses or try to justify any of it. She listed specific ways she wanted to rebuild our relationship, including regular therapy sessions together that she'd already researched. She'd written down 3 therapist names with their contact information and specialties. The letter was detailed and thoughtful and clearly took her hours to write. I folded it back up and set it on the nightstand, feeling something like hope mixed with caution. Blake came out and saw my face and asked if I was okay. I told him I thought maybe I would be, that maybe we both would be. He climbed into bed next to me and we fell asleep with the letter sitting there, a promise of work still to come, but also of possibility. The honeymoon in Mexico gave us space to breathe after all the wedding chaos. Blake and I sat on the beach one evening watching the sun drop into the ocean, and he asked how I was really feeling about everything with Haley. I admitted I was still working through it all, that inviting her felt right, but didn't magically erase years of hurt. He squeezed my hand and said, "That's exactly how healing works. Messy and complicated, and never all at once. We spent the rest of the week swimming and eating and not talking about family drama, which felt like the best gift we could give ourselves. When we got back home and unpacked our suitcases, I sat on the edge of our bed staring at my phone. I finally texted Haley asking if she was serious about the therapy sessions she'd mentioned in her letter. Her response came through in less than a minute with 3 therapist names, their specialties in family relationships, and links to their websites. She'd already done the research and was just waiting for me to be ready. The preparation surprised me more than anything, showed me she wasn't just making empty promises at the wedding. Mom hosted dinner 2 weeks later, the first time the whole family gathered since the wedding. Haley and I were carefully polite, passing dishes and saying please and thank you like we were strangers at a formal event. Everyone else looked relieved just to have us in the same room without yelling or crying. Grandmother Theodora had more color in her face than she did at the hospital, and Mom kept wiping her eyes watching Haley and me interact without hostility. It wasn't comfortable or natural, but it was a start. 2 months later, Haley and I sat in our 3rd therapy session together, and we were finally getting past the surface stuff about who got invited where. She talked about her anxiety making her feel inadequate compared to me, how she avoided me because she felt like a failure next to my stable life. I explained how invisible and were rejected I felt, how every exclusion made me smaller. We weren't suddenly best friends again, and maybe we never would be. But we were sisters who were trying, and that felt like enough for now. Blake told me later he was proud of the work I was doing, and when I looked at our wedding photos that night, I felt grateful Haley was in the background of those memories, instead of being a painful absence that would have haunted them forever.